Yesterday on Capitol Hill, Linda Tripp, the whistleblower in President Clinton's Monica Lewinsky scandal, spoke publicly for the first time in 15 years. She was joined by lawmakers and other whistleblowers in marking National Whistleblower Day. This runs about 2.5 hours.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll come back, please, to be seated for the Honorable Charles Grassley, the patron saint of whistleblowers, saved my case, saved my bacon, and Dean Zerby is now here to introduce this wonderful, wonderful man.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thank you all. It is probably one of the greatest honors I've got to introduce the man that I worked for and went back to work for 4 times. Maybe a 5th, who knows? But he is, as you well said, Jane, the patron saint of whistleblowers. And I would just say it comes in his bones in terms of supporting whistleblowers. He has been their great champion and supporter all of his time in the Congress, and even before when he was in the Iowa State House, he was very much active for whistleblowers then. So it is just, if you will, a part of who Charles Grassley is his great support for whistleblowers. Just 2 quick thoughts for you, and I want to get right to the senator, is that I'll never forget when Ernie Fitzgerald was on the phone for him, the great whistleblower Ernie Fitzgerald, and he, unfortunately, the senator was rushing off to a vote, and Ernie said to pass on to the senator just one thing. He said, tell the senator John 8:32, and Senator Grassley, having gone to Sunday school more than I had, immediately responded back, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And that is certainly the senator's guiding light. As you all came in here into the Dirksen Senate building, as you look to the right, you may not even done it, but I do it because I had to come into Dirksen a lot when I was working for him. There's a plaque there that you'll see that has all these senators' names on it, probably about a dozen senators. And I would tell you, and this building isn't that old, it's from the 50s, that to be honest, other than LBJ, what a shock, all the other senators' names, even for someone like me who's kind of a student of the Senate and its history, are pretty faded, pretty long gone in terms of what they did and what their impact was. But I would tell you for Senator Grassley, not only because of his years in legislation and work there, but more than anything, his work with whistleblowers, his work in the whistleblower statutes, be it the SEC, the IRS, of course, the False Claims Act, all the whistleblower protections, that work and his work will live on for this republic. Every time a child is getting a drug, that's being protected. Every time a cop is protected from a bullet that's stopped by a vest. All those types of things, they're all going to look back. A nursing home that is being provided good care to a nursing home. All that is due to Charles Grassley's tremendous work for whistleblowers on behalf of whistleblowers and those statutes and laws. And really that culture that he put in of celebrating whistleblowers is just completely a sea change from when I first came to Washington. We still haven't had the Rose Garden ceremony yet, Senator, for the whistleblowers, but I'm confident before you go that they'll do it. So I want to just get a little bit of a rev up here and say to you, I give you the Sultan of Senators, the Hercules of New Hartford, Iowa, the heavyweight world champion for whistleblowers, the undefeated champion, Charles Ernest Grassley.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. I just tweeted this morning to the real Donald Trump. You know, that's, what do you call it? / real Donald Trump about having a Rose Garden ceremony. It probably won't happen, but I'm not going to give up. Okay, Dean, thank you very much for the introduction, and more importantly, for the warm welcome you've given me, not only at this meeting, but so many meetings where I've had a chance to address people one-on-one or a small group of people or a large group like this. It's always a pleasure to be with you. This year, I'm proud that the Senate National Whistleblower Appreciation Day resolution is co-sponsored by the entire Senate Whistleblower Protection Caucus. The text of our resolution quotes a much earlier one, can you believe it, dated July 30th, 1778, from the Continental Congress. On that date, the representatives of the 13 colonies recognized the courageous contribution of whistleblowers aboard the warship Warren. The whistleblower had sent one of their own, the captain of the Marines, to present their petition describing wrongdoing by the commander of the Continental Navy. The Congress responded by suspending the Commodore from his post and by passing the first whistleblower protection law. This resolution said this, quote, "It is the duty of all persons in the service of the United States to give the earliest information to Congress or other proper authority of any misconduct, frauds, or misdemeanors committed by any officers or persons in the service of these states," end quote. So celebrating and honoring people like you, or advocates for whistleblowers like you folks are, in our country is not new. It's a time-honored American tradition and literally as old as the Republic. Now, when I say time-honored, timely, but not always honored. And we have this gathering here today to honor whistleblowers, as we should. Since that time, back in 1778, Congress has sought to protect, honor, and reward whistleblowers. Not enough, however. It's not just the right thing to do, it's a sensible thing to do. Whistleblowers, like those sailors on the ship Warren, know where to find the waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. History has shown us over and over again how much our country needs whistleblowers. In 1863, nearly 90 years after this first resolution Congress passed, then in 1863, the Lincoln's Law was passed to help fight massive fraud on the Union Army during the Civil War. The law, we now call it the False Claims Act, empowers private citizens to sue corrupt contractors on the taxpayers' behalf. For their pain, these citizen whistleblowers would receive a portion of what the government recovered from the wrongdoer. And it worked. Empowering these whistleblowers to prosecute fraud proved to be smarter, faster, and more effective than just relying on government. Now, that shouldn't surprise any of us. In 1986, those provisions inspired my modern amendments to the False Claims Act to restore the power of whistleblowers to help the government fight fraud. The results speak for themselves and speak very loudly. From 1987 to 2017, that's 30 years of that law, the federal government has recovered more than $56 billion through False Claims Act. 72% of that came from actions initiated by whistleblowers. So you know how important whistleblowing is when it comes to saving the taxpayers' money. And you don't know how early on in the False Claims Act being administered by earlier departments of justice, how many of them took every opportunity they could to say that this whistleblower might not be entitled to the money. I remember one important case in the late 80s or early 90s in Ohio where a district judge called in somebody that was for the U.S. attorney and said something along the lines when this attorney was arguing that this whistleblower, this key tam person, should not be allowed to get X number of dollars or as much. And they said, do you realize that you wouldn't even have a case if this person hadn't come forward. Now, 72% of the money's been recovered from people like that. After a period of time now, I don't find fault with the Justice Department on whistleblower claims from that point of view, but from the point of view of their slowness sometimes to join into a case, I still find fault. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat administration or Department of Justice. What does matter is that somehow somebody just doesn't want to give credit where credit's due. And I think that 72% figure makes it pretty clear that people like you, or if some of you are here advocates and not really a whistleblower, whatever you're involved in, you know that that's where the information comes from. It ought to be encouraged, not depressed as sometimes. Tens of billions of dollars, in other words, once lost to fraud, has been returned to the federal treasury, all because of whistleblowers. You'll hear from one of these whistleblowers today. He will tell you about how he saw his bosses knowingly put police officers in danger. Dr. Aaron Westrick will tell you his story of blowing the whistle on body armor manufacturers who sold defective vests to federal, state, and local law enforcement officers. And you'll hear these vests were anything but bulletproof. Within 2 weeks of each other in 2003, 2 police officers were critically wounded when vests made by these companies failed. 1 officer died. The other was permanently injured. This year, Dr. Westrick's case finally came to an end when all the defendants settled. Now, why should it take that long when something's so obviously wrong to finally get justice to a person that wants to save people's lives? Well, when that happened, this is what Dr. Westrick said. I lost my job and career. I have no regrets. I would blow the whistle again. When you don't listen to whistleblowers like Dr. Westrick, that's when the regrets come. Because of his remarkable courage, the product was pulled from the market and no doubt countless lives saved. But think about this. What if his company had listened to him in the first place? Times would have turned out very differently for the 2 brave officers whose vests failed them. Oh, and by the way, because of his case, the government recovered more than $67 million in lost funds and damages. Because of the whistleblowers like Dr. Westrick, the False Claims Act is the most effective tool we have to fight government fraud. And finally, well, maybe I should say just finally, maybe over the last 10 or 15 years out of the 30 that it's been in effect, the Justice Department's finally saying that in their press releases. So they assume that whistleblowers, I should say opponents tend to be, opponents of false claims law tend to be very skeptical about whether these reward provisions are justified or not in some cases, and I've already spoken to that, so I won't go into detail about it. But these people that are opponents assume whistleblowers are motivated by self-interest or greed, and the rewards just encourage bad behavior. But the reward programs are not about what whistleblowers gain by blowing the whistle. They're about everything that whistleblowers stand to lose. The truth is that whistleblowers are so ostracized and reviled, they suffer retaliation for speaking out. You sometimes have heard me use these words. Whistleblowers are about as welcome as a skunk at a picnic. In lots of cases, it costs them their livelihood and their reputations. And if they get fired, they can't just go out and get another job. because oftentimes they're blacklisted. So they encourage huge legal costs at the same time. They lose their income, maybe for a long period of time. Hey, let me digress here just for a minute and quit reading. I told you I tweeted about this to the real Donald Trump. I'm telling you that whistleblowers would have less of a problem if the President of the United States, and I'm talking about any president, because I've had this conversation with 8 presidents, from the top of the bureaucracy, which is the chief executive, the President of the United States, to the lowest levels. And maybe there's no low levels in government service because it's all public service, and it ought to be honored. But whatever it is, from the president on down, then wouldn't everybody managing people in government understand that whistleblowing is pretty important? And wouldn't that be better off, government would be better off if we had more people who know where the skeletons are buried, if they would do it? And I won't tell you which president this was, but I was on Air Force once, more than once, but this time I had an opportunity to be on one-on-one with the president. And I said, you ought to have a Rose Garden ceremony and honor these people. And you know what the answer was? Well, if we did that, we would have 3,000 whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork. Well, that's just exactly the purpose of my suggesting it to him. We need to get more of you people coming out of the woodwork. Now let me get back to my text if I can remember where I left off. So these people encourage huge legal costs at the same time they lose their income, and maybe for a long time. The whistleblower reward provisions don't just provide an incentive for them to step forward. In many cases, the rewards are there to make them whole for the retaliation that they suffer. It just makes sense. The government would never know all the ways it was getting ripped off without these whistleblowers. So whatever the government recovers because of their information, whistleblowers ought to receive their share of that. That's the model behind the whistleblower program at the Securities and Exchange Commission and at the Internal Revenue Service. And it works. Since their creation, these programs have netted more than $975 million and $3.6 billion, respectively, in recovery sanctions, disgorgements, and revenue loss to tax fraud. Clearly, when these agencies work with whistleblowers, they succeed. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and that's what Congress is supposed to be doing. Every step of the way, I've been doing oversight on these programs and pushing them to do even better. They need to complete their investigations and make timely and complete award determinations. In that vein, I'm pleased that earlier this year, Congress passed my amendments to ensure IRS whistleblowers are not shortchanged. My amendments clarified that the pot of recovered funds the IRS uses as a basis for whistleblower awards known as collected proceeds includes unpaid taxes under Title 26 and fines and penalties collected under criminal and civil cases. It's only fair because none of these proceeds would have been collected without the whistleblower's help. Congress also approved my amendments to end the double taxation of Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower awards. Now whistleblowers don't have to worry about paying taxes on their legal fees. Even with these welcome changes, our oversight work is never done. So I'm still pursuing much needed improvements to the IRS whistleblower program. Earlier this month, provisions I authored were included in bipartisan tax administration legislation introduced by Chairman Hatch. These reforms are aimed at increasing communications with whistleblowers. They authorize status updates and clarify that the IRS can share information with whistleblowers to advance investigations. Most importantly, the reforms would provide protections for IRS whistleblowers from employer retaliation for the first time. I'm also actively engaged in getting to the bottom of the Securities and Exchange Commission's proposed new rules for its whistleblower program. It is vitally important that whistleblowers who are making the difference in the SEC investigations every day are awarded that what Congress has determined they're entitled to. The SEC cannot arbitrarily decide what it thinks is quote unquote appropriate for a whistleblower to receive. I'll tell you what's appropriate. You've heard the old saying, let the punishment fit the crime. Well, let the award in these cases truly fit the whistleblower's contribution, because there would be no recoveries in these cases if there were no whistleblowers. That's just how the system works, and the opposite is true. Going after waste, fraud, and abuse without whistleblowers is about as useful as harvesting an acre of corn. I'm a farmer, so you know where I'm coming from, with a rusty pair of scissors. That applies across the board to bad behavior by corporations, as well as wrongdoing by our own government. Many of you have also blown the whistle on waste, fraud, and abuse in agencies, some of the very same agencies that go after fraud in the private sector. Your courage has helped us in Congress fulfill our constitutional duty of oversight and ensure government is truly accountable to the people we're supposed to be serving, no matter the source of the wrongdoing. Whistleblowers who give the earliest information, as Congress said in 1778, about it, quote, to Congress or other proper authority, deserve our profound gratitude. In its 1778 resolution, Continental Congress recognized the true value of whistleblowers in our democracy. In our 2018 resolutions, today the Senate will proclaim exactly the same thing. But that is not enough. I've been asking every president since Ronald Reagan. I'm repeating something, but it's written down here, so just be patient. I've been asking every president since Ronald Reagan to hold a Rose Garden ceremony to honor these brave men and women. Not a single one of them has taken me up on it. Just think about it. Tens of billions of dollars in funds lost to fraud and corruption have been recovered. Untold amounts of government waste and misconduct have been exposed. It's all about whistleblowers doing their job. I think it's about time that the president joined the rest of us here in saying thank you. This president ought to be very willing to do it because he has come to Washington to make changes. He wants to drain the swamp, and there's nobody that can help drain the swamp, anybody more than people like you who are whistleblowers, who are willing to say something's wrong because you're just politically conscious and not only politically conscious, but you're very proud of being an American. You just want government to do what government's supposed to be doing and spending the money the way the government wants it to work. So I'm going to say thank you. I had two more sentences, but I'm going to pass them on. Hey, I'm taking some of your papers with me here. Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay. That man is a hero. He stared down, in my case, the FBI. What can you say? That takes courage. Welcome to the 240th anniversary of Whistleblower Day. The first U.S. whistleblower law was passed on July 30th, 1778. My name is Jane Turner, and I am an FBI whistleblower. And in the last 240 years, I cannot say we've come a long way, baby. In 240 years, the laws have changed, but not much has changed for the whistleblower. I'm going to mention here, my daughter and I came in from Minnesota, and throughout this few hours today, I'm going to point out some people who have come a lot longer distance. Ioannis Kasoulas, he is from, would you stand up please? He is the president of the Hellenic Anti-Corruption Organization. He flew in from Greece on his own time and money. Kelly McCauley, can you stand up? Kelly McCauley? He is a member of the Canadian Parliament. Welcome. Whistleblowers have encountered the following: harassment, sometimes not only you, but your family members. Today we have Cheryl Whitehurst, who is married to Fred Whitehurst, his wife. She was harassed, intimidated, and eventually constructively discharged from the FBI because her husband blew the whistle. We have sons and daughters, mothers, all here, and all who have suffered also, along with the whistleblower. We've suffered allegations about our mental health. We've suffered allegations about areas we're having to go for fitness for duty. We've been surveilled. We've been ostracized, separated from coworkers. We've endured open hostility, alienation. Our work has been discredited. We've had drops in performance reports. We've had undercutting of our work, downgrading, labeling us ineffective, insufficient, and we're fired. Whistleblowers have been subjected to lengthy and difficult adjudication processes. My actual court time was over 10 years. I'm at 15 years and still fighting the FBI in terms of my retirement when I was constructively discharged. We are thrown into an ocean where we can see no land, where we can see no sun, no stars. The only compass a whistleblower possesses is our integrity and our bravery. But we face true north, and we stay on a torturous journey. We have made life-changing decisions that have affected us deeply, that have cleaved our soul, that's damaged, and in some cases, destroyed our families. We've seen divorces. We've seen kids that have been alienated because their mothers or fathers were not there. We've had to answer critical questions. If not me, who? If not now, when? Mark Twain said, "The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why." Whistleblowers have to stand up for the truth. They have to stand up for justice. We are the human in the arena. We are bloody but unbowed. I know the price has been too high. I know the damage that has been so severe. But where are we headed? Can we head toward the light, where we are in control of our own narratives. You'll hear somebody at the end of our time together who did not have control of her narrative, and it almost destroyed her. Can we name and shame those that do us wrong? Can we network? Can we support? Can we heal? No point is as critical in history as now. We must not allow others to control our narrative. What is the narrative about whistleblowers? We are disgruntled ex-employees who are just after money. The FBI even said I was ugly, smelled, and my mama dressed me funny. I'm serious, they questioned some of my dresses when I worked up in Indian country. Every year, the National Whistleblower Center celebrates whistleblowers on this day. We celebrate their courage, those that have raised their voices in the name of combating fraud, corruption, and other crimes. Even facing adversity, whistleblowers have the strength and the conviction and the dedication to truth. We have some whistleblowers out in the audience, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome over 60 whistleblowers in attendance today. If we could have you stand real quickly and sit real quickly. Kusa Agiman, are you here? Excellent. Hap Barco blew the whistle on Halliburton. Mary Ellen Belding blew the whistle on New York construction. Are you here today? Yolinda Bell, nursing home abuse in Virginia. James Bobrovsky, DC Water and Sewage Authorities. Please. Thank you. Mary Bozian, hope I pronounced that right. New York math teacher. Michael Carey, New York Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. Joseph P. Carson, Department of Energy. Kathy Cole, Public Education. Carol Sakarowski, Department of Navy. Zarkowski, I'm sorry. Carol, there she is. Rita Daniels, whistleblower on Virginia State Bar. Julia Davis, National Whistleblower, National Security. James D. Nofrio. There he is. Veterans Administration. Brian Donlin, Public School System. Carolyn Douglas, Judicial Corruption. And I'm coming back to you, stay with me, we're gonna have a pause because Michael Horowitz is here with us. He is the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. He's responsible for the oversight of the FBI and the DOJ. Since 2015, he has also served as the chair of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, an organization comprised of all 73 federal inspectors general. This is a very important man, and you know what? He's one of the good guys. Please come forward.
Thank you, Jane. Event, and I appreciate Steve making time available so that I could be here today, because I had agreed to speak down the street at a judge's invitation, and so I had to figure out how to get here today as well, and so very much appreciate Steve making time in this slot for me to be able to be here, because this is so important and something that I very much wanted to be here to speak to you about. Although I must say, had I known I was going to follow Senator Grassley and you, Jane, I'm not sure I wouldn't have come back even later to speak. And what great presentations and discussions. We in the IG community value all that you do as whistleblowers to come forward. This is the 40th anniversary of the passage of the IG Act in 1978. We just had an event here in the Capitol that Senator Grassley hosted. As you may know, he has been here since 1978 and is one of actually 4 members of Congress who has voted on every single piece of IG Act legislation. At the same time, he has moved forward so many important pieces of legislation in the whistleblower area, and they really go hand in hand. It is so important for us as IGs to have all of you be willing to come forward and report to us on waste, abuse, misconduct, mismanagement, what you see in organizations that you've worked with and worked for, whether they are within the agency, with contractors, with grant recipients. I often speak about this with the folks in my office. We oversee in the Justice Department over 100,000 employees. We have one of the largest IG offices with 475 people. 475 people overseeing 100,000 plus people. That doesn't even touch grant recipients and contractors. Gives you a sense of responsibility that can be overwhelming at times for us. To do that job most effectively, we need the employees at the Justice Department be willing to come in and speak to us. We need employees of Justice Department contract recipients, grantees, to be willing to come in to speak with us. That's how oversight gets done effectively. That's how waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement is rooted out. That's how government is made more effective and efficient. And that's really what, as Jane was saying, you all have fought for over the years. And as Senator Grassley mentioned also, you're not in it for the money. You're in it because you want to see justice done. You want to see what's right done. You want to see government work the right way. You want to see government worked effectively. You don't want to see people cheating and stealing and lying their way with the taxpayers' money. And that's what it's all about, and that's what IGs work for, and that's why it's so important that we work on these issues and further these issues. And it's one of the things that I've been proud to see in the IG community over the last several years as we've worked forward to advance issues of importance on whistleblowers and whistleblowing. We've worked closely with Senator Grassley's staffs. We've worked closely with the House and the Senate whistleblower caucuses. We've worked closely with organizations like the National Whistleblower Center. NGOs throughout the government have heard their voices and your voices speak to us on issues that are important, that issues that we've got to work for, that issues that make sure that the people like you all who perform such a vital and important public service, coming forward, speaking the truth, speaking about what needs to change, and making sure that you all never get retaliated for doing so. It's often easier said than done, as Jane was talking about. And I know from my career as a prosecutor, when I was in New York City, and I'm familiar with some of the cases that you've referenced, the folks from New York here, we did a lot of police corruption work in New York City. And again, at the Justice Department, we oversee law enforcement agencies. And it takes courage for anybody to come forward in any organization, but I have to say it takes tremendous courage in a law enforcement organization for people to come forward and speak truth to power and tell what's really going on. And oftentimes, it is the only way we learn about what's going on in an organization. It's because of people's willingness to come forward. And so the couple of things I want to mention that we are moving forward on in the IG community and give you a sense of what we're working on. And Rob Storch is here from the NSA, who's now the new NSA Inspector General. I had the good fortune of having Rob as my deputy and start up our Whistleblower Ombuds program, as so many of you know. He expanded it in the IG community and brought together the entire IG community. He's now working with the new IG for the intelligence community, Michael Atkinson, to develop a similar program in the IG community. We've worked on training. The SIGI Training Academy in the last year has had 2 training programs for IG, standing room only events. We are moving forward with the Senate and the House Whistleblower Caucus on issues of importance. We've worked with them on the recent legislation that has moved forward to make the Ombuds program permanent and to enhance it further. Those are all critical steps forward. But really the most important thing is to work with this community, with whistleblowers for the next 40 years as we continue our effort as IGs to reform government, to make our programs more effective and efficient that we oversee, and to make sure that you all have a safe place to go, to speak truth to power, and to make sure that you're not retaliated against for doing so. So thank you for everything you do on behalf of the entire IG community. This is a great event, an important event. I frankly wish I could stay for the whole event like I did last year. I am going to have to leave early, but in advance, thank you for everything you do.
I'd like to mention that Robert Storch, who's the IG, he already got a ruling in favor of a whistleblower at NSA. Good job, keep it up. We also have Lee Martin in the audience, who is the Director of IRS Whistleblower Office. Welcome, Lee, glad to have you here. I'm going to go back to our whistleblowers, but I don't want to forget Sheila White, who was a plaintiff in the Burlington Railroad case. She won a case, yes. Her concern was, do you have to be fired in order to be successful as a whistleblower? It took 9 years to get that judgment. And what is interesting about Sheila White's case is it came into direct play into my case in the 8th Circuit. We build on each other, whether it's your body, your bones, your money, whatever it takes. We are building on each other. We need each other, we need to support each other, and we need to network. I'm going to continue because we have some incredible whistleblowers in this office, or in this place today. Matthew Fogg, U.S. Marshals. Matthew, I know you're here. Matthew's been with us for several years. Jacqueline Garrick, Department of Defense. J.W. Grenadier, City of Alexandria, Virginia. Tanya Hathaway, a whistleblower on Oklahoma State. Darren Jones, FBI whistleblower. Are you here, Darren? Ronald Kavanaugh, Federal Drug Administration whistleblower. Are you here, Ronald? Brian Kinter, Family Court Corruption. Brian? Michael Kerwin, Army Corps of Engineers. Dale Klein, stand up if you're here. There you go, Dale. Whistleblower with the Veterans Administration. Boy, do we need whistleblowers like you. Thank you, Dale. Robert Kobus, FBI. Robert also was in adjudication for, and his case was tied up for over 10 years. Amazing. Jack Levine, California National Guard whistleblower. Susan Lindauer, intelligence community. She's with the intelligence community, so she cannot stand up. Michelle McDonald, civil rights violations in family court. Robin Marcato, acting inspector general, USAID. Stand up if you're here, Robin. Sherry Marquise, Department of Defense whistleblower. We need those. Arthurita, thank you. Arthurita Martin, discrimination against African Americans in federal government. Standing. Michael McCrae, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Michael. Kelly Miller, FBI whistleblower in law enforcement. Jeffrey Monser, New York State Developmental Disabilities whistleblower. Arlene Mullen, dialysis whistleblower. Marita Murphy, New York Air National Guard. Barbara Newman, Lehman Brothers Holdings. David Nolan, Air Marshal. Are you here, David? Michelle Parker, Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation whistleblower. Nancy Paul blew the whistle on high-risk kidney patients. Thank you, Nancy. Jason Piccolo, Department of Homeland Security. Francisco Portolos, Department of Energy. In the back, Marcel Reed, Acorn whistleblower. Dan Richardson, Bristol Myers whistleblower. Michael Stanhope, Missouri National Guard whistleblower. Michael won. He proved reprisal. Sandra Schenkat, Scottsdale, Arizona Homeowner Associates whistleblower. Andrew Skullick, Service Disabled Vets whistleblower. Neil Shelton, North Carolina Court System. In the back. Gerald Smith, United States Air Force, IG. Linda Tripp, White House, whistleblower. John Ty, U.S. Department of State, whistleblower. Frank Vetro, corruption in the Suffolk County, New York School. Tanya Ward, Jordan, Department of Commerce. David Weber, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And he won too. It's good news. That's good news. Walter Wanger, New York State whistleblower. Aaron Westrick, body armor whistleblower. Sheila White, of course, Burlington Northern, is going to speak next year. Frederick Whitehurst, FBI. Kenneth William, law enforcement whistleblower. Stephen Zanowick, U.S. Marshal Service whistleblower. And I do believe that's it. Is there anyone I missed? Please stand up. Do not be embarrassed. Do not be embarrassed to be a whistleblower. If I missed your name, stand up and announce yourself.
Massachusetts.
Hold on, we're going to get a microphone on there. We have one. Okay.
Richard Hill, VA.
VA whistleblower.
Dana Martin, VA.
VA whistleblower. Is there anyone else? We want to honor you. He won at the Supreme Court. Congratulations.
Ferdinand Mannion, blew the whistle at Camp Lejeune on 4 Carat rings. Did not touch the case.
Thank you. Thank you. You are all in the arena. You may not have won, but you are unbowed. Thank you. Right now, we're going to have Dave Calapinto introduce fellow FBI whistleblower, the grandfather of FBI whistleblowers. So Dave, who is a whistleblower attorney, please introduce Fred.
It's an honor to introduce Fred Whitehurst, who blew the whistle on the FBI crime lab. He told me when he came up last night that we started representing him 26 years ago. And Fred had a celebrated case, high profile, testified in the O.J. Simpson case, the World Trade Center 1 case. He made a lot of news in the FBI lab, but really his mission, he really only wanted one, well, actually 2 things. One thing he wanted to do was to ensure that FBI agents from the FBI lab, when they went into court, would tell the truth. And the second thing he wanted was to find out who got hurt. And he has spent the last 20-something years since his settlement at the FBI searching for those who got hurt. And it has taken that long, and people are finally being released from prison today because of DNA technology and other things that actually enables people. But he's going to come up here. Come on up, Fred. He is going to tell us about what he's been doing.
You know, Jane talks about how bad we hurt, and then I say, oh, darn. The people that have spent time in prison make our heart pale. I'm going to tell you about a particular case that highlights what I'm talking about. On the 3rd day of August, 1989, an FBI agent by the name of William Tobin reported that one of his fellow agents had given false and misleading testimony in hearings involving then-sitting U.S. District Judge Alcee Hastings. 27 times is what Mr. Tobin said, Agent Tobin said. He gave that to his managers, and this is what they did with it. At that point, that agent should have been taken offline, and everything he did reviewed at that point. Human lives, people on death row, people in prison, at that point, yes. On the 12th day of December, 2017, Judge Todd Edelman, in a memorandum opinion and order vacating the conviction of Derry Nelson, Mr. Nelson, stand up, of Mr. Derry Nelson. "33 years later, Mr. Nelson spent 33 years in prison because no one would listen. This is what Judge Edelman said. Central as it was to this trial, Malone's testimony rested on a foundation of lies and exaggerations. There's a human face attached to this tragedy. There's a human face. This is a real story. And so we hurt and we cried and our families got hurt and oh darn, come on, oh darn. He just got out the 1st of March. And you know what? He can't stand here and rant and rave because he's under a gag order. They're going to retry him. He can't say anything to you. He's under a gag order. And we will respect that gag order. But I'm not. I'm not. I'll hush in just a minute, man. The fellow that put him down is living off a nice retirement check in Hopewell, Virginia. There is no accountability for FBI agents. There just won't be. I've come to that conclusion. If there is no accountability, then there has to be maximum oversight. And that oversight comes from the courage, the kind of people that are in this room. The Derry Nelsons in the world should not have to go through that. I gave him a computer. I should have given him a boat anchor. He doesn't have a boat, and he had no clue what to do with that computer. 1985 is when he went down. When you remember how bad you hurt, remember this man. This man. What we went through pales next to what he went through. Thank you.
Takes your breath away, doesn't it? You wouldn't have whistleblowers without whistleblower attorneys. Stephen M. Cohn is the executive director of the National Whistleblower Center. He has authored 8 books on whistleblowing law, is known as the definitive expert, and it also includes the new Whistleblower's Handbook, a step-by-step guide in doing what is right and protecting yourself, which I believe is outside. His historical research led to the rediscovery of America's first whistleblower law, passed by the Founding Fathers during the height of the American Revolution on July 30th, 1778. Stephen is a history buff. He will recount the history of this landmark legislation for you today. But before he gets up, before Stephen, there was his mother, Corinne. Stand up, please. "92 years old. You keep on chugging." Stephen, thank you for all you've done for whistleblowers.
First, I want to thank everyone for coming and for caring and for doing what you all have done. I also just want to mention a little bit about Jane. She was one of the first women FBI agents. She had jurisdiction, what's known as Indian Country, a massive reservation in North Dakota, and the only agent in that reservation, and the only woman agent all around. And she led the charge on fighting child sex abuse, violence against women, and essentially was the champion of all women and child victims on those reservations, created a revolution there. She filed a discrimination suit. She became a whistleblower. Her career was destroyed. But when we did her trial, and it was in front of a jury, which many federal whistleblowers will never have that ability, but we were able to get her to a jury, and the jury heard her story, and they heard the FBI witnesses. They gave her the largest award permitted under law. In fact, even larger, and it had to be cut down. And one of the reasons she won is because 2 United States attorneys took to the stand and said what she did and the contributions she made. And they were just, when you read her story or learn of it, just unbelievable. For the approximately 14 years, she was the woman, she was that woman agent. And just one quick story, when she busted a guy for the most brutal rape of a child conceivable. Cannot go into the details, but many of these crimes had been ignored. But when she showed up to do the interrogation and got the confession, the rapist wouldn't talk to anybody. But when he heard that Jane was at the jail, and Jane said, "I've got cigarettes," that rapist said, "I'll talk to the woman FBI agent." And she got the confession that day. He went to jail for life. So I just want to say thank you, Jane, for what you've done. The footnote. When she stood up for her rights, the Bureau went after her. I think we must have fought that case for how many years? 15 years. She won every case. But the resources that the Bureau put in to destroy her, it's just unforgivable. But many of you have lived that yourselves. We do this event on Whistleblower Day because this is the day for whistleblowers. We must reclaim our history. 240 years ago today, our founding forefathers passed the first whistleblower law. And why that is significant is because these are the people who created the United States of America. They wrote our Constitution. They created the basic framework of our government. And within 6 months of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, at the height of the the Revolutionary War, they were confronted with whistleblowers who were exposing misconduct by the commander of the U.S. Navy, including mistreatment of British prisoners, charges that could be considered embarrassing to the government. One of the whistleblowers, and there were 10 on a ship outside of the Providence Harbor, one of them, they all signed the petitions, one jumped ship, made it to the Congress with the petitions, and said, "Please help us." And at that day, that moment, our founding fathers had to deal with whistleblowers and how is our government going to view them for the future. And as you heard from Senator Grassley, they suspended that commander of the Navy. They listened to the whistleblowers. But the commander was not through with them. He was a powerful person. His brother had been the governor of Rhode Island. He came from a very powerful family in Rhode Island. So he filed seditious libel lawsuits against the whistleblowers in Rhode Island court. And they caught 2 of them and threw them into jail. And from jail, they wrote to Congress. I'm going to read you a letter. We dug it up out of the archives. And it's pretty much, having represented whistleblowers for 34 years, this is what I hear daily. I'm going to quote from their letter from Providence Jail, written on July 8th, 1778. Your petitioners, not being persons of affluent fortunes, but young men who have spent most of their time in service of their country in arms against its cruel enemies, finding themselves arrested for doing what they believed and still believed was nothing but their duty. Held to bail in a state where they were strangers, without connections, without the ability to defend themselves against a powerful, artful person with all of the advantages of his office and the wealth he has amassed in the current war. Humbly ask Congress for their intervention. And that, in my view, was the turning point. And on July 30th, Congress again convened. They heard the evidence. And they enacted America's first whistleblower law, calling upon every inhabitant of the United States to call to the appropriate attention of the authorities crimes. And copies of that resolution are on your tables through Whistleblower Appreciation Day, and the senator read that resolution. But they did two other things. They voted money to pay for the lawyers in Rhode Island. They hired an attorney who would later become the Attorney General, a brilliant young lawyer. They wanted the best. And that lawyer defended them in the criminal case, and they won that case. They also released all the documents. There was no Freedom of Information Act. They didn't care if the British read those documents. And they spent, and we actually went to the archives because I wanted to see if it was true. I mean, I'm reading the resolutions, and a law clerk pulled out the check from the Continental Congress for the $1,400 written to the lawyer. And what I found just dumbfounding was that is at the height of the American Revolution. The Continental Congress was broke. They needed every penny for guns and bullets for the Revolution. The Founding Fathers would be hung for treason if they lost the Revolution. They're not going to lose an election or be embarrassed in a poll. They would be hung. But they took that money and gave it to defend the whistleblower. And it's clear why. They were giving that money and that resolution to defend their vision of democracy that Thomas Jefferson had put in the Declaration of Independence. What would be worth winning the revolution if the people didn't have the right to expose government misconduct? Why win? So they stood up for you. And we must remember this. We must fight for this. We must ensure that this incredible act of democracy is remembered. Thank you. I'll introduce Alan. Thank you. Thank you. I'll introduce Alan. And now I have the great honor to introduce a person I've had the incredible pleasure to represent. It took us 14 years to win this case, Dr. Aaron Westrick. Senator Grassley again mentioned him briefly, but I wanted us to add a couple points. Dr. Westrick has been a police officer since the 1980s. He's now a professor. He also part-time police. When he was a young officer, he was shot in the chest, right above the heart, by a criminal, and he would have died but for the bulletproof vest he was wearing. He understood what body armor means to not just law enforcement, but to the military, to all the first responders. So he got a great job, became the director of research for the largest body armor company in the United States, and he learned that the vests they were selling thousands, tens of thousands, to every police department across this country and to the federal government were defective. The company was making millions, and he had to make a choice. And he was the only person in the entire body armor industry, in the entire country, to stand up, to get those vests off the market, and eventually to hold every single company accountable. Dr. Aaron Westrick.
I'm truly humbled to be here. Recalling as I was writing my speech notes on the airplane, I had to get up at 3:30. I'm from northern Michigan, right on the Canadian border. I teach up in Sault Ste. Marie, the Canadian Friends. 20% of my students are Canadians, but Steve said, hey, we're going to get little get together. Senator Grassley will probably say something about you. And I'm in the company of all these great people, and I'm humbled. I've heard of many of the whistleblowers' work here. Firsthand, I've worked with Fred in roundabout ways. I teach forensic science, and some of the points that he's made and the things he brought out in the crime lab situation with the FBI is remarkable. Jane, I'm completely taken back. Thank you, everyone. And I'm honored to be in such good company. I'm Aaron Westrick. I've been called many things: officer, sergeant, doctor, and rat. I'm a whistleblower. I expose fraud in the body armor industry. I'd like to note right off the bat that there are some companies in the body armor industry that did not participate using this defective Xylon product, but most did. And as Steve indicated, I was the only one that stood up. This luncheon is very significant for me for many reasons. First, the recognition and how to be with such great company. But it was also late in 2003 when my wife and I made a trip to talk to Attorney Cohn and the other attorneys in the National Whistleblower Center. Great people. And little did I know that it would be 15 years later that things would come to a close, and they are, and we do appreciate that. But the biggest surprise, and it's already been mentioned by Jane and such other persons here, is that, and because it didn't always work out this way, is my family is still intact. I'd like to see a round of applause for the spouses of the whistleblowers. My wife, Kim, is here. 35. We've been married 35 years. And I was going to say 36 because that's coming up, but she said, don't stretch it. See how today goes. But we have a son, our son, he's been a police officer for 11 years now. My brother's a police officer. My whistleblower journey did begin in 1982. I was called to a B&E in progress, and I know that the marshals and agents, soldiers, Marines are in this crowd, or understand this, break and entering in progress. And as we arrived on scene, my partner and I, we noticed the suspect was fleeing out of the back of the home, and I gave chase. He, what we call in the business, he laid down. I fully believed that he would get up and run again, but he decided that he was unimpressed. So he opened fire on me with a .357 Magnum, striking me in the hand and just below my badge on my body armor. I returned fire. So we had .357 Magnums, lots of flashes in the night, as they would say. And as the agents and the marshals and that in this crowd, I hate when this happens, right? That started my whole belief and understanding as I studied, and I had a bachelor's degree at that point from Michigan State. I earned a master's degree and eventually a PhD, studying the psychological, physiological factors of effects of being struck on body armor. And it's kind of started this whole the importance of equipment. And the more I read, I realized that our officers, our agents, our Marines, our soldiers, be it weaponry, and Halliburton, weaponry, armor, it's very important. Very, very important. You have to know it's going to perform to standard. You have to know it's going to do what it's supposed to do. A warrior's worst nightmare, a police officer's worst nightmare is his or her picking up her firearm and having it not work, as an example. That's the dream that they report most often. They have to be able, and so it became very important. It became a mission as I went through my studies. In 1996, I became a director at the world's largest, at the time, most successful body armor company. In 2001, as director of research, I noticed ballistic degradation in the main profit-making product, I might add, from the company. The product's name was Xylon. Quote, Kevlar on steroids, not Kevlar, so we're clear. I noticed within the inner channels, I made very clear, number one, I thought there was a problem. I noticed right away that I was immediately excluded from many things. I guess I was once quoted in a deposition, Steve might remember, quoting the Eagles, that I had to go eat lunch all by myself. They wanted to keep me around, I think, because sometimes it's worse to have the whistleblower outside the tent, right? But it was very, very rough. A lot of harassment even within the law enforcement community as things went on. But I stood tough with it. We placed the actual complaint, we got together in late 2003, and in 2004, of course, the complaint was filed in court, in federal district court, and put under seal. I recall coming to Washington, D.C., and meeting with many federal agents from many, many agencies. Young federal agent looked at me and he pulled me aside afterwards. He says, you understand what you're doing? He was supportive. And he said, you understand what you're doing? I said, yes. He says, you sure you understand? This is going to be tough. He was right. He was right. But we went forward. Thank you for all the lives that have been saved, for all the persons here, the whistleblowers. Thank you to Senator Grassley and the government officials here that make this happen. This is the only way it's going to happen. We have to have whistleblowers. I'm truly humbled. And I felt a sinking feeling when the gentleman, the Marine, indicated that his case didn't go. And my case, we won. But the bottom line is this: this is the most important thing to me right now. I thank you very much. Thank you, Cone. Okay, the National Whistleblower said I really appreciate it. Can't forget Dave, for God's sakes. They've all had to put up with me for a long time, and I think that it's been a long time, but it was worth it, and I would do it again. And I'm in good company. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask the chair of our board, Gina Green, to come, and she's going to describe a new initiative we're trying to bring whistleblower protections to stop the extinction crises. And believe me, the struggles we have here in the United States, they also have them where the poaching and the extinctions begin. Gina.
Good afternoon. Thank you. And I am super honored to be the co-chair of the National Whistleblower Center. And I first want to say I tremendously admire and respect all you whistleblowers. I just want to give you guys are totally amazing and brave. Now, I've spent most of my life protecting, I'm a scientist and an environmentalist. I've been protecting the world's natural resources. I mostly work in the tropics, in developing countries on wildlife protection and management, as well as protecting the management of the oceans. Now we know that the world is under increasing threat from organized crime. Let alone the 500 billion wild-caught fish industry suffers from rampant, illegal, and unregulated and unreported fishing. The forests are being decimated for lumber, and endangered species are being trafficked into extinction for medicinal, jewelry, and clothing consumption. It's a real problem. I know and I've witnessed that whistleblowers have been incredibly effective in combating other types of crime. Thank you. You guys have set the trend. You have set a model. However, it is time we bring the power of whistleblowers into the wildlife and environmental sphere. Wildlife crimes often originate outside of the U.S. This is an international problem and needs an international solution. Informants and whistleblowers outside the U.S., especially in developing countries where the rule of law is problematic, deal with tremendous hardships. And the U.S. should make every possible effort to incentivize them to come forward to law enforcement authorities and to ensure their confidentiality and safety. We need to take whistleblowing outside the U.S. And today I have the great pleasure of introducing our wildlife speakers. I'm going to introduce two in a row and ask that Dan Ash, he is a former director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and now serves as the president and chief executive officer of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which represents more than 230 facilities in the U.S. and outside internationally. He represents and oversees over 186 million annual visitors. Ash, and we have the pleasure, he was previously the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where he worked to protect endangered species, restore wildlife habitats, and enforce federal wildlife laws. So I welcome Dan, but before Dan, hold on, we have another very special guest, and her name is Beth Allgood, who is the United States Country Director for the International Fund of Animal Welfare. And Beth assures the strategic development and implementation of U.S. projects and campaigns, with special emphasis on the U.S. role in ivory trade, wildlife trafficking, and wildlife security issues. Beth oversaw the strategic development and implementation of IFAO's U.S. campaigns to protect whales from threats, address global wildlife crime, and protect elephants. So I first welcome Dan, and then Beth will proceed, and we have a new subject, a new area where we would like to bring whistleblowing to. So thank you. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Steve, distinguished guest, and Beth. It's always good to share a podium and an occasion with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. I want you to put an image in your head of elephant, rhinoceros, tiger, grizzly bear. If you know what a pangolin looks like, imagine a pangolin. If you don't know what a pangolin looks like, it's a small mammal. It's kind of a cross between an armadillo, and an anteater. It's the most trafficked mammal on the face of the planet. Wildlife trafficking is one of the big four trafficking crimes in drugs, in arms, in humans. It's having a devastating impact on wildlife and on communities, people, indigenous people, people who are dependent upon wildlife for subsistence. It's a threat to our world heritage as we see these wildlife populations diminishing before our eyes. And the problem is us, 7.5 billion people who share the planet today. And by the middle of the century, that will be 10 billion people. And it's not just the number of people, it's the affluence of people as we lift people from poverty worldwide. Wildlife trafficking is a crisis of the middle class and upper class as animals are traded as luxury commodities, animals and products from animals. It's a crime that's difficult to detect. We're very good at catching poachers, but we're not so good at catching the people who are profiting from the poaching. And wildlife trafficking is a high profit and low risk endeavor. As the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I was proud of our law enforcement professionals who helped us begin to turn the tide and take the battle to the people who are making the profits. Operation Crash was the most successful undercover wildlife investigation in history. It's called Operation Crash because a group of rhinoceros is called a crash. And we decided to let the poachers go and let product move and try to catch the people who are profiting from the crime, and it was successful beyond our imagination. We crushed ivory twice in Denver, Colorado, and in Times Square to raise the profile of this issue to a worldwide audience. We banned the sale of ivory here in the United States, and we challenged China to do the same, and they have. We've recently seen ivory bans in the UK, soon hopefully in the EU. That was impossible without U.S. leadership. At the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, our 230 members are engaging in this issue. The modern zoological institution is a purposeful institution. They are powerful because they represent a collective opportunity. They invest more than $220 million a year in direct support for field conservation. They have more than 200 million annual visitors. And we have recently joined forces with the U.S. Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance now being a program of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So we're joining with 50 NGOs and corporate partners to bring voice to this issue worldwide. An expression of that voice during the last Congress was the End Wildlife Trafficking Act. And one of the most amazing things about it is unusual thing in the world today, which is a bipartisan act of concern. Republicans and Democrats coming together to say we need to end wildlife trafficking. And yesterday was International Tiger Day. And on International Tiger Day, we joined forces with the World Wildlife Fund and the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums to bring force to the issue of tiger farming and the trafficking of tigers and tiger products. In the current Congress, the effort continues. We have H.R. 5697, the Wildlife Conservation and Trafficking Act of 1918. It gives us new tools to detect wildlife trafficking, to prosecute traffickers, making wildlife trafficking a predicate offense under the RICO and Travel Acts, allowing for funds from prosecution to be recovered and committed to conservation. So we have an opportunity to work with you and your community to bring force to this issue, to uncover wildlife trafficking at its roots, to empower people to report and protect them when they do report, to turn the tables on traffickers, make wildlife trafficking a low-profit, high-risk endeavor. We have the opportunity to save animals from extinction and save a future for our children and grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. It is really inspirational, really inspirational. So I know many of you personally, and so I know you know this, but some of you may not, that in East Africa, poachers are slaughtering elephants faster than these elephants can reproduce. In fact, tens of thousands of elephants are cruelly killed each year to meet the insatiable demand for ivory. The people and communities that live the closest to them, in fact, are the ones that pay the highest price for this illegal activity. And this is just one example of the urgent need to protect animals from illegal killing and to protect the brave people who come forward with information on this wildlife crime before it happens. So my name is Beth Allgood. I'm the U.S. Director for IFA, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join you today to talk about IFA's perspective on the connection between wildlife crime and whistleblower protections. IFA is a global nonprofit conservation and animal welfare organization that identifies and combats threats to animals across the globe. For nearly 50 years, our organization has provided a global leadership, innovation, and hands-on assistance to animals and to communities in need. And we envision a world where all animals are respected and protected, and we strive to achieve the delicate balance between human and animal coexistence. We recognize that our mission begins with understanding and empowering people and local communities, and because these communities often directly interact with threatened species, they possess invaluable field experience and wisdom. It's precisely this fundamental spirit of cooperation and collaboration in multiple communities around the world that's driven our success over 50 years, and our work wouldn't be possible without the essential component of trust. And that includes trust in the community and trust in the system. Especially where government corruption is ripe, this can be quite difficult. So when this is lacking, the trust in the system, we're reminded of the fundamental role that whistleblower laws play and the purpose that we're here today. So IFA's global role and half a century of experience has shown us firsthand that there's a very real safety risk, as you may know, for people on the ground, inside these communities and inside the governments, for people who have urgent information to share. And these people understand the greater good of the environment and animal conservation and their moral imperative to act, regardless of their own circumstances. And there's no information more urgent than that held by a whistleblower, because that real-time information can literally mean life or death for these animals. And it's often the only key to stopping a crime such as poaching before it begins. So IFA recognizes the need to protect these whistleblowers and to take further steps all the way through the chain, from the poaching to the smuggling of wildlife products, through ultimately to the markets where the demand happens. And this year, we were delighted to welcome National Whistleblower Center Executive Director Cohn to a U.S. Department of State-funded cross-border wildlife security training on the Kenya-Tanzania border. The training focused on a range of countermeasures to wildlife trafficking, and the module on applying whistleblower laws to assist wildlife authorities, customs personnel, and local policymakers was particularly innovative. We're also pleased to announce that IFA and NWC signed a strategic cooperative agreement last month to combat wildlife trafficking around the world, especially where the threat of corruption is most acute. This is just the beginning. Through these efforts, IFA and NWC will continue to disrupt the wildlife crime supply chain. As long as the demand for illegal wildlife continues to keep the illicit trade alive, we'll need innovation, collaboration, and mutual trust to resolve the problem. The integration of whistleblower laws has proven effective in combating other forms of crime, as Dan mentioned. And at IFAW, we believe the time is ripe to integrate these protections fully into the wildlife crime sphere. And we support congressional efforts to more fully bring whistleblower laws into the field of wildlife trafficking enforcement. It's no surprise that monetary rewards are a motivator, but in our line of work, the promise of confidentiality is just as great. It can mean the safety and well-being of the whistleblower themselves, in addition to the animals we all want to protect. I just want to conclude my remarks with a reminder that animals and the environment are truly a fundamental component of our well-being, and that the value we place on them cannot be effectively quantified or in any way overstated. The need for stewardship of our resources begins at the individual level and connects us with the global community. It's when we join together, when we build that element of trust and give the brave and caring individual a chance to safely act for the benefit of the greater good, that we can achieve a sustainable and peaceful coexistence with the natural world. I thank the National Whistleblower Center for inviting me, and really for all of you, for all that you do. Thank you.
All right, next we have something very special, and we have Representative Madeline Bordello from Guam, who will be addressing us by video. All right. Lights.
Buenas and Hafa. I am Congresswoman Madeline Bordello, representing the U.S. territory of Guam. And I want to wish everyone a happy Whistleblower Day as we celebrate the 240th anniversary of our nation's first law to protect whistleblowers. Unfortunately, I'm heading back to Guam and unable to attend this year's event in person. But I do want to thank the National Whistleblower Center as we recognize the contributions of whistleblowers to good governance, the rule of law, and for their commitment to the truth. There is bipartisan support in Congress for empowering whistleblowers to help us tackle the global wildlife trafficking and poaching crisis. Wildlife trafficking and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing rank among the top global crimes. And these criminal activities generate billions in illicit profits each year for transnational criminal organizations and extremist groups. These same groups are responsible for human rights violations and narcotics, weapons, and human trafficking. In tackling the global wildlife trafficking trade, Congress can help to conserve iconic wildlife and cut off illicit financing for groups responsible for these human rights abuses, global political corruption, and even terrorism. Whistleblowers are a proven resource for law enforcement, and we should engage them in the fight to prosecute wildlife poachers and take down trafficking rings. By encouraging whistleblowers on wildlife trafficking and related crimes to come forward, Congress can increase enforcement and leverage existing federal resources. Marine wildlife species often go overlooked, but are increasingly targeted by poachers, traffickers, and illegal fishing. Across the Pacific, we are increasingly seeing foreign fishing fleets forcing vulnerable people smuggled out of their home countries and taking illegal narcotics as stimulants to fish around the clock without rest out of fear for their very lives. These seafood products are largely untraceable, and without help from whistleblowers could end up in your grocery store aisle, on the menu at your favorite restaurant, or on your dinner table. Whistleblowers can provide the actionable intelligence needed to prosecute these crimes and advance American leadership in eliminating the global trade in trafficking, wildlife, and illegal seafood products harvested with slave labor. And we can do all of this with existing federal resources at no cost to taxpayers. So again, I want to thank the National Whistleblower Center for highlighting these critical issues. These are concrete steps that we can take right now to tackle these global problems. All it takes is the will to act. Thank you.
Just a quick note, there is a Whistleblowers documentary going on tonight between 6 and 10 at Busboys and Poets on V and 14th in Washington, D.C. I was told to mention by Kathy Cole that there would be free food. David Colapinto is General Counsel of the National Whistleblower Center and specializes in QTAM cases. He is co-author of Whistleblower Law, a guide to the legal protections for corporate employees, and he is a really great guy. David, you want to come up and introduce the next couple of speakers?
Thank you, Jane, for those kind words. 240 years ago today, there wasn't just a bipartisan consensus to protect whistleblowers. There was a unanimous consensus in the Continental Congress to do so. And today, we depend upon at least a bipartisan consensus to protect whistleblowers. And it gives us encouragement when there are dedicated people who work in some of these government offices that have been created by Congress to protect whistleblowers. And we may not always agree with what these agencies do, but we can take some pride and some solace in the fact that there are dedicated people who really do believe in whistleblower rights in some of these agencies. And one such person is Tristan Levitt, who is here today to represent the Office of Special Counsel. He is the Principal Deputy of the OSC, and will you please give him a warm welcome?
It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here with you today. I don't know if anyone has kind of thought through the timeline of this, but as has been identified, IG Horowitz mentioned that this is the 40th anniversary of the IG Act, and it also happens to be the 40th anniversary of the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. And I think it's quite significant that, as Steve's research has dug up, that act, both of those acts were passed exactly 200 years after the resolution that's been much discussed today, highlighting the contributions of whistleblowers. I think that's a very auspicious timeline and a good recognition of the significance that these events have for our government. Special Counsel Henry Kerner, who spoke at this luncheon last year while he was awaiting confirmation by the Senate, sends his warm regards as well. Both Henry and I are very, very grateful for the warm support of the whistleblower community. I came to OSC as the number 2 official 1 year ago after working here on Capitol Hill for 8 years. 4 years of that was for the patron saint of whistleblowers, Senator Chuck Grassley, to whom I'm immensely grateful. Over the course of my time on the Hill, I interacted with hundreds of whistleblowers, including many of you here in this room, both who consider yourselves whistleblowers as well as those in the whistleblower advocacy community. I hope that those of you that I have interacted with over time, as well as those of you who know Henry Kerner, know that we are very passionate about protecting whistleblowers. Because of this experience for me, coming to OSC was really a dream job, and I'm grateful to Henry Kerner as well as to his predecessor at OSC for giving me the opportunity. Part of what I loved most about staffing the whistleblower hotlines, both for Senator Grassley and then for the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, was I had the opportunity to interact with people all the time. And many of them were people that I felt like I could help. I was in a position to help in some way. Sometimes that was by helping their disclosures to be investigated and to be heard, and those led to things like congressional investigations. Sometimes they weren't things that we were in a position to do something with, but we were able to direct them to the right place and to explain the process, such as how things worked at OSC or at various inspectors general offices. Sometimes, and these were often the most difficult, even if I couldn't do anything else, I felt like it was meaningful in some cases just to be able to hear someone out, to be able to say to them as one human being to another, I'm really sorry that this happened to you. This sounds like a horrible thing that you've experienced. Sometimes everyone needs that kind of listening ear. Even when I did think that someone's disclosures or their case for whistleblower protection stood a pretty good chance of success, I tried really hard to help manage their expectations. Even in some of the biggest congressional investigations you may hear of, the whistleblowers involved there did not have an easy road, as you can imagine, any more than those of you who have blown the whistle had. In those cases, I tried to help them to understand that notwithstanding the protections that were in law, being a whistleblower didn't give one a shield or an umbrella. It didn't mean just because there's protection that no federal manager would ever have a lack of respect for those protections. And of course, at the end of the day, even rights with remedies take time for those remedies to be vindicated and for the process to play itself out. A lot of harm may happen in the time before someone is vindicated. Nevertheless, I was always touched by the courage of those who came forward. So having been at OSC for this period of time, as much as I'm miss those day-to-day interactions, I am grateful for the work of those at OSC who handle those day-to-day. One of the things that I found is most difficult is that out of the thousands of individuals who come to OSC, and we receive about 6,000 claims a year, there's only a small percentage of those that we are able to do something with. Some of that comes down to the limitations in the law. Some of it comes down to the fact that OSC is a small agency. Inspector General Horowitz mentioned having their size of staff for a portion. OSC covers the entire federal government. But even when those things are not things that OSC is able to follow up on, I hope that people feel like they're heard by OSC. Those who know me know that I want to do whatever I can within my power to be helpful. As a political appointee, there's a unique balance between being able to help set a tone of leadership in an agency and ensuring there's a process with integrity while respecting the judgment of the crew professionals. But we are focused at OSC on doing all that we can to shorten our process, to ensure that our operations become more efficient, and to provide good customer service along the way, so that even if the answer that we come back to someone with is a negative one, people can feel like they were heard. I do hope that the work that we're doing at OSC is meaningful for people. Ernie Fitzgerald used to say that he was just punished for the crime of telling the truth, and I genuinely believe that for so many people, blowing the whistle is an act of conscience. Whistleblowers are the most patriotic people I know. So to all those of you who have helped ensure that taxpayer dollars are protected, who have helped to shine a light on fraud and abuse in the federal government, who have helped to draw attention to imminent threats in public health, I, to all of you, say thank you. All of us and the American people owe you a great debt. Thank you very much.
All right. We want to make sure we get this right. Our next guest is Dan Meyer. Many of you may know him. But we want to make sure that we get the right title, which he is the former chief of the intelligence community whistleblowing and source protection office, I believe. Did I get that right?
Yeah, right.
All right.
We'll take that.
We'll take that. And he was the executive director of one of these offices in the government that was set up to help whistleblowers in the intelligence community. Not an easy job. And we've known Dan for many years, and he has been dedicated to extending and protecting whistleblowers in the intelligence community. He spoke here last year at our summit, or our luncheon, and he has spoken at many other Whistleblower Day events. However, since he was last here, Dan was removed from his position as executive director of the program in retaliation for blowing the whistle. And at the as observers at the Whistleblowers Center, we believe that Dan's case is really shaping up as one of the most important federal employee whistleblower cases in recent memory, and it reminds us very much of the struggles that Fred Whitehurst faced taking on the FBI. And really, the outcome of Dan's case will very much determine what type of whistleblower rights employees in the intelligence community will have, or whether they will have any at all. It should concern us all, and please give him a warm welcome and support, Mr. Dan Meyer.
Well, it's good to be back. This is my first public appearance since my untimely departure from my job last November. I promised the DNI I would not talk about my experience directly. That's all going to have to wait for a while. I'm also, as a former intelligence officer, still under speech restrictions. All of us who serve in the intelligence community make a lifetime commitment to keeping under wraps the secrets that we learn on the job. My remarks are my own remarks. They're not those of Dan Coates. They're not those of Michael Atkinson. But I have some thoughts for you today on where we've been and where we're going. I would like to thank 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans who've been very helpful over the past year, Senators Grassley and Senator Paul and Senator Warner and Senator Wyden. All have been very helpful in shaping this question that's going to move us forward as we go to the next level of intelligence community whistleblower protection. Think about it. It's required to blow the whistle as a federal employee. Executive Order 12674 says you shall report corruption. It's not optional. It's not discretionary. This is a mandatory. It's a shall. That's why we have hotlines. That's why we have lawful disclosures. That's why we have all these procedures. We should get to a point where federal employees can actually put on their performance evaluations how many times they blew the whistle in the last reporting period. I do that in mine. Your supervisor or manager should be able to look at your record and say, you know, Joe Bag of Donuts, Jane Six-Pack, you blew the whistle 4 times in the last period. That's great. We'll give you a 5 for that particular item. It's part of our job as federal employees and supporters of federal employees to promote a system of bringing that wrongdoing forward. I do think Senator Grassley is dead on target in that there needs to be a White House event. The bookend to this event, I think it should be in February of every year. So as everybody comes back from the winter break, they get geared up to blow the whistle. I do think the executive branch, and it's not a partisan observation because it's both Democratic and Republican, has a challenge with such an event because, let's face it, most of the whistleblowing is about activities in the executive branch. So no matter how well-intentioned President Trump is or President Obama was about whistleblowing, by the time they get settled into office, the swamp creatures start to emerge and start to drag them down. That's what happens. So I've sat in National Action Plan Committee meetings at the White House, and I've listened to the government attorneys primarily who've talked about the ill-advised nature of bringing together people in a conference to talk about roles and responsibilities. But really, the White House is optimally situated to do that. I want to take you back to Steve's anecdote about the U.S. Navy and the whistleblowers on the maltreatment of British prisoners of war. There was an event about 15 years later called the XYZ affair, which was another naval problem for us, a quasi-war with France down the Caribbean. They were seizing our ships. 3 of our diplomats had been told they need to give bribes for actions to take place in Paris. And it became a real nasty mess back here in the United States, pitting Americans who were pro-French against Americans who were pro-English. I highlight this because there was a very significant act of whistleblowing when President Adams, through a process not unlike our Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, informed the Congress of this wrongdoing, the solicitation of bribes. That's the type of process our intelligence community whistleblowers need to be using and need to keep themselves safe and keep them from being reprised against by supervisors and managers if they should stray down the other path that occurred in the XYZ affair, which was leaking. Future President Jefferson, working his network within the federal government, was leaking material out of the federal government to his media contacts. Albert Gallatin was one of them, became the Secretary of Treasury a few years later. And that started a dynamic in our society between whistleblowing and leaking that is very unhelpful for our whistleblowers inside the intelligence community. So our supervisors and managers need to help us create a system that allows for the employees to safely bring the information forward. And we need to do it now in this environment because unlike a few years ago, we are now in a situation where we're being divided by our international ties. We have pro-Russia elements in our government. We have pro-Europe elements in our government. Our whistleblowers are needed now to expose the security indiscretions, the pay and allowance indiscretions that make our senior officials leverageable and exploitable by foreign agents on either of those sides who are going to try to shift the public opinion in a way that the American people may not want it to go. Thank you very much.
It's amazing the people we have here, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. Michael D. Cohn is a whistleblowing attorney, a partner in Cohn, and Colapinto. And since 1985, Mr. Cohn has successfully represented numerous high-profile retaliation and QTAM cases in several cases. He is going to introduce the next speaker, and I think you will be blown away. Michael, you stately whistleblowing attorney, you. If I may, could we have Linda Tripp please come up here and stand?
All right. As you know, my name is Michael Cohn, and I am the proud co-founder of the National Whistleblower Center, along with my brother Stephen and my law partner Dave Colapinto. In 1988, the National Whistleblower Center became the first national organization to use the word whistleblower in its title. Back then, people had no understanding of what that term meant. So we wanted to define what it meant for us and for anyone who came to our organization. And that definition begins, a whistleblower is someone whose loyalty is to the truth. The truth can't pick a side. It's neither Democrat nor Republican, and it's most certainly not beholden to the powerful. I guess it was some 20 years ago that one particular whistleblower asked us for help. She was in real trouble. She'd been removed from federal service, her reputation destroyed, a criminal indictment was looming over her head, and the walls of post-traumatic stress were closing in. That whistleblower was Linda Tripp. My first introduction to Linda Tripp came on the TV screen. Some extremely unflattering images appeared again and again and again. It was always the same image. And I got a very uncomfortable feeling in the way the whistleblower was continuously being presented. I didn't know anyone involved in that endeavor, and I left it at that, something that just bothered me. Until she came into my law office and seeking help. At that point, I was free to ask her any question I wanted answered, and I wanted to find out the answers of why that video image bothered me so much. And I wanted to really find out whether she had loyalty to the truth. Before anyone ever knew her name, Linda Tripp was ostracized. Government officials entered into her privacy areas that were supposed to be protected by law, and they released it to destroy her reputation before anyone knew her name. We pursued those Privacy Act violations on her behalf, and we forced the government to admit to having intentionally violated the Privacy Act. Linda Tripp helped cement a cornerstone of our democracy, that even the President of the United States is not above the law. Her story is timely and important, and it is time that the larger whistleblower community has an opportunity to hear from her.
Thank you. Thank you. Normally, a root canal would be preferable to speaking publicly. I tend to not do it. I wanted to say that my daughter Allison is with us today. Absolutely unwavering support, and I'll never forget that. And her eldest daughter, one of our 7 grandchildren, with us as well. So welcome. I think my 5 granddaughters out of the 7 would benefit from hearing this one day. They're too little now. You're almost there. Look, we've heard today amazing stories. It always really blows my mind. But a whistleblower armed with the truth wields enormous pressure on wrongdoers, on folks who believe that they have a way to do whatever it is they want to do. Doesn't matter whether it's civilian, military. It's enormous power that we bring to the table. And over time, we've forged a path leading to much greater accountability in industry, in politics, justice, and a more safe and honest world. But it all comes at an enormous price for the whistleblower. We're different. We're compelled to act. There comes a point when it's no longer a choice. And despite the hardships and the personal pain, not only to us, but to our families, when asked, most of us say we would do it all again. You know, in my case, had the circumstances been similar, and had the sitting incumbent been a Republican, I would have acted no differently at all. It was simply at its core about left and right. It was never, or rather, it was always about right and left. No, wrong. Right and wrong, never left or right. And I will say that this became so polarizing, globally, really, with everyone having an opinion, and yet at its core it had nothing to do with politics, which is hard for anyone to understand if they remembered the story many years ago. But what it was about was exposing perjury and obstruction of justice. It just simply was never about politics. We talk a lot about whistleblower protections, and I think enhanced protections are long overdue. For instance, I believe that all of us as whistleblowers will not be fully protected until those who actively perpetrate the retaliation are individually, personally held accountable. And I know you all in your own walks of life and in your own experiences know what I'm saying. It's not just the company or the agency that needs to be held accountable, but it should be the individual, one who does the bidding of those in higher positions. If there is no pain on a personal level to those individuals, then there's no deterrence for those that follow. And I think all of us sitting in this room can identify with this statement. Too few of us are ever made whole again. It is virtually impossible to get your good name back. The vitriol, the attacks, the slander remain in the public domain and sort of color people's thoughts forevermore. I'm not sure they ever really dissipate, regardless of what you say or how loudly you say it. We must do better. I know what it's like to be in the crosshairs of the most powerful person in the world, to be attacked viciously, not because I said something untrue, but because I said something people did not want to hear. And it was about a popular president. You know, to politicians, only sides matter, and the truth becomes the casualty. I think we're all a bit different. Whistleblowers believe that truth is not disposable, not dispensable. Integrity and honor mean something. And to those who see us as betrayers, if we're seen through a lens of negativity, then my question to them is, if I'm not a team player, whose team? Whose team? You know, in my case, my duty, Steve talked about duty, my oath was to the office of the presidency, to the institution, not to the sitting incumbent. And I was true to that oath. I told the truth, but I do fault myself for not having the gumption or the courage to do it sooner. I was faced with a culture of corruption, and again, this is not partisan in any way, that was infecting the office of the presidency. I was quiet for many years. I was afraid on many levels to speak up. There was a quote, and I will give you that quote. Open quote, "We will just have to destroy them." End quote. I first heard these startling words in the West Wing of the White House. They were chilling. They were not directed at me. But in early 1998, I began to fully comprehend what the politics of personal destruction really means. And you know, they say forewarned is forearmed. So I knew what was coming, but I was ill prepared for the power and the fury and, in the end, the overwhelming effectiveness of the smear campaign. What had seemed abstract to me, we'll just have to destroy them, was now personal, and I was the target. I know what a real high-tech lynching feels like. I felt like that's exactly what happened. It began with the smoke and mirrors you saw on your TV, where it turned a sitting president into a victim of a vast conspiracy. It was the full frontal attack on anyone who would dare speak against him, the destruction of another human being, and the besmirchment, belittling, and ridiculing for political gain. When the villain is magically victimized, which is essentially what happened, the wrongdoer became the victim. That's when, in my case, the whistleblower was essentially destroyed through all these allegations and the ridicule and humiliation that I suffered at the hands of a complicit media, certainly a willing entertainment industry. So it was not pleasant, and it was very unpleasant for my family, and for that I'll always be sorry. You know, there are two things that I think we got out of today with a lot of the speakers, actually. We all end up sharing a couple of things. First, I don't even know how to quantify this, but it's a feeling of sheer loneliness, a feeling of an utter sense of isolation until you meet them. But a feeling that you're on your own and that no one really is on your side. There's nothing quite like it, and there's nothing that can prepare you for it. But then comes the second phase, and I think we all face this on some level. The retaliation, the retribution, the personal and the professional attacks. When you speak truth to power, the powerful push back. When this story broke, the 24-hour news cycle was in its infancy. Back then, it was normal news at normal times of day, and there was just so much they could fit in. However, that changed. My story was tailor-made for this very thing. And for me, it was the birth of advocacy journalism. It was a time when reporting took a backseat to opinion journalism and slant. And it was all filtered, most importantly, through a political lens. So while I was watching this, as everyone else was, I was pretty stunned at the portrayal. It colored the national dialogue. It formed national opinion based on very little fact at all. And in my opinion, victimized the wrong person. I hope that my being here today can help change that dynamic, even if just a little bit, so that whistleblowers, future whistleblowers with just causes, can avoid the harsh reality I faced. I blew the whistle on not just a powerful person, but the most powerful person in the world. It was not until I became aware that the president was informed that I, quote, knew everything, that I decided to act. To this day, I regret that I didn't do so sooner. But when, in July of '97, that I became aware of what he knew, I threw caution to the winds and accepted that my career, my livelihood, my pension, and by then I think it had spanned a good 7 years, federal civil service. I knew all of it would be a casualty of the action I was going to take. And to those out there who say I did this for personal gain, I say, standing here 20 years later, what did I stand to gain then or now? I stood to lose everything, and in fact, I did. And yet, if I had to do it all over again, I would. Thank you. I will say I simply couldn't have lived with myself had I failed to act. It was poorly done. You know, there was no handbook, there was no manual that said this is how you take on a sitting president as a lowly civil servant. But had I done things that might have been better for me in terms of gathering evidence, like taking contemporaneous notes, documenting evidence 2 years before I finally did the catch-up to recreate on celluloid what I had been hearing in a horrifying fashion for 2 years. Had I done all that, perhaps the end result would have been different. It might have been the removal of a president from office. And again, what I provided to the independent counsel was insufficient. Had I had the proof that I should have had, the result would have been different. You know, a woman I once knew quite well famously said, "It takes a village." I couldn't have navigated the shark-infested waters whistleblowers face without the passion, dedication, determination, and brilliance of my incredible attorneys who are here, right here. The three co-founders of the National Whistleblower Center, Steve Cohn, these are important names, Steve Cohn, Michael Cohn, and David Colapinto. Thank you so much for all that you do. They broke the mold with these visionaries, and we are all better for it. Thank you. And so now the speaker.
That was incredibly powerful. I thank you, Linda. That was amazing. And thank her family for standing by her, because I remember a special agent in charge who said to me when I was blowing the whistle, and he did not want me to continue forward with it, and he said, "You have a kid of your own to think about." And I knew that was a threat. And I know that Linda had to be thinking of you when she made some of the decisions she did, and that takes incredible courage. Thank you, Linda Tripp, for your courage. I would like real quickly, because we're going to wind it up, I would like real quickly for you to meet my daughter, Victoria Turner, who survived while I was out in the desert. I would like to thank Stephen Cohn, founder of NWC, Michael Cohn, Dave Colapinto, also Mary Jane Wilmoth, the Chief Operating Officer and Secretary Treasurer of NWC. I give a nod to her mother, Kay. Thank you for a wonderful daughter. Together, these four amazing attorneys have over 100 years serving for whistleblowers. That's amazing. I also want to thank Julia Mellick and Maya Ifretti. They put this together. They did a wonderful job. And the whole crew of the National Whistleblower Center staff and interns. I want the whistleblowers to remember to network and to take care of yourself, physically, emotionally. And I want to see you next year, and I want to hear how you are controlling your narrative. Thank you. Have a great year. Thank you for coming.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Hey, great job. Good job.
Thank you. So there may still be some food out there. Please get it. And cookies, and there's definitely cookies. There's definitely coffee.
You gave a great job.
No more food? Oh, well, at least there's cookies and coffee.
Aaron, there's a book coming out by David Tenenbaum. Okay. It wasn't body armor, but it was light armored survivability. Okay. So this was the what do you do with IEDs, basically.